All right. Hello, everyone. We're here with Stefan and Ryan, the founders, creators of IMFit, Myofascial Contouring, and Intentional Movement Specialists. So Aga and I just got back from Victoria a couple weeks ago after receiving 8 sessions from these guys. It was a 10-day treatment, completely restructuring our entire myofascial system, the crystalline matrix of our beings. And we've been going through these huge transformations ever since then. And as practitioners in these spaces, we really want to make an effort to connect you, our community, with the highest quality practitioners that we can across the board, so that you can access the most transformative things that we can find on the planet. And we were just blown away by this treatment. So we wanted to connect you with these amazing practitioners out in Victoria to give you a sense of who they are and what they do. Is there anything that you wanted to share about that?
Yeah. This body therapy goes hand in hand with the work that we're doing in ceremony. And we spend a lot of time processing suppressed emotions, trauma, accessing the subconscious mind through those psychedelic spaces. But when we come back into, everyday reality, we're still in the old mold. We're still in the subconscious body, because the body is a representation of the subconscious mind, and all this amazing transformation can be happening inside in the psyche on subtle levels. But then we also have to come back to the body and restructure it. Like Dea said, it's a crystalline conduit of our consciousness. So of course we have to also take care of our body and understand how this beautiful vessel works. And I was so grateful to have been introduced to, I met Ryan first. He actually came for a combo about a year ago, and he told me about this incredible treatment. And I could just look at his posture and how he held himself and how perfect alignment he was. And though he spoke about consciousness and the fascia, I was like, okay, this guy is totally tuned in, tapped in. I want what he's got. So I'm so happy. Thank you for introducing me to this work, Ryan, and meeting Stefan. So so happy to have you here to introduce you to our community.
Yeah. And as we've been talking about this, the way I've been describing you, Stefan, is a perfectly sculpted human. Like perfect form and function.
Thanks. I made me myself.
So just kind of passing it over to you guys for a minute. Why don't you introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about you and how it is you came to be doing what it is that you're doing right now.
Well, I'll start. So for me, my background is in adventure guiding. I have a degree in that, and that's where I spent a lot of my time in my 20s, doing backpacking, a lot of multi-day big expeditions internationally. And through that work, I noticed that my body started taking a big beating, because I was in the habit of just moving my body through space, however it moved through space, never really being too conscientious of how I was doing it. And so over time, in my own body, I started to notice different areas were breaking down. And this was very disconcerting, because I bought into a lot of different indoctrinations that we have. One of them being that after the age of 25, you no longer get any stronger, and it's just a downward spiral from there physiologically.
Yeah.
And I bought into this, and that's dangerous, side note, because whatever you believe, you will always find evidence to support. And so I was looking around me, seeing some other people I worked with that were starting to break down. I didn't want this to be part of my fate. And so I went in for additional schooling, becoming an emergency medical responder as well as a massage therapist. And that's where I met Philip, the person that I started developing these programs with. And he too had been very hard on his body in his youth. And we were looking for solutions, because a lot of manual therapy methods out there are very topical in terms of the relief they give you. It's just addressing symptoms. Very few of them will actually go right down to the root and correct the imbalances. And so after going through these programs and connecting the dots, looking at current research, especially regarding fascia, what is it as a tissue, as an organ, as a system, and what does that mean for movement and manual therapy, we started developing what we have now. And now I'm 36 and feel more mobile than I've ever felt in my life. And we finally created a system to be able to deliver this to people. And we've had all kinds of successes with folks from 12-year-olds all the way up to people in their 80s, to the point where some people actually, it's quite common to see people gain height back. Again, a common misconception that we shrink with age. Often that's a result of misengagement and disengagement. I can go into a lot more detail about these things. I know you just asked for a quick little intro. That's part of the journey that brought me here. And pass it over.
Well, I was a professional race car driver. I raced Formula 3, FIA, IndyCar, many different things. So I had a lot of accidents, crashes. I hit a concrete wall in 2013 at 9 times the gravitational force, banged my knees together. I also am an extreme sport athlete. So I jump off mountains and I fly those wingsuits, and I've landed in the Panamanian jungle and smashed myself up pretty good. And universe brought Steph and I together through introduction, and he started doing treatments on me. And I felt good, went away. The universe brought us back together, and at a certain point where I really needed it. And it ended up moving down here about just over 2 years ago, and started developing the psychological aspects and the reprogramming, subconscious reprogramming aspects of what this manual therapy does. Having quite a bit of experience dealing with different depths of the mind with the things that I do and the high performance activities that I do gave me a real insight and opening to the work. And in developing the THR program to where it is today with my partners has really unlocked many things within the subconscious, allowing you to view and see patterns, repetitive patterns. We'll get into that later within the Zoom call, but basically that's a little bit about me. I do many other things. I work with AGA, with some Cambo and different medicines. I've got a lot of experience with medicines over the last decade as well. And it's a big part of my life. And this work has allowed me to interact and use tools that I found in this work with the medicines back and forth. Mm-hmm. So moving forward, that's a little bit about me and Steph. So yeah, I'll hand it off to him to start.
Yeah, thank you guys. And just for all those just joining in right now, we're going to have like a Q&A session near the end. So if any questions come up for you, just write them down and we'll do our best to ask the questions that we think you're holding in your mind right now. But maybe just to kind of catch all of us up, can you explain a little bit about what the fascia is and why it's important as an organ, as a system?
And how to connect it to how it's connected to our mental well-being. Like that.
Absolutely. I'll address the first part and Ryan will take that second piece. Mm-hmm. So what is fascia? That's a great question. Let me put it this way. There cannot be 2 without 3. What I mean by that, when you're about 2 weeks old in the embryo and developing, that's when fascia starts to form. And this is what happens with divisions in cells. We have one singularity, and then as it splits, now you have these 2 separate pieces, but here's the thing. You need something to connect them, to bind them together. That's fascia. To put it very simply, it's the glue that contains everything and allows everything to be separate yet integrated with one another. So a simple example would be like the yin yang. You see the symbols. One is a very feminine quality, one's a masculine quality. They're separate, but they're contained by a whole. And so fascia is that bind that brings everything together. So what does that mean? It means it's the compartments that house everything. So we can look at the muscles, for example. Do we really have 600 muscles in 600 sacs, or is it that we have 1 muscle in 600 sacs? Now, when we look at fascia, there's a lot of debate as to, some people say it extends as far as actually being bone, being muscle, and even including blood and lymph. Because when you're developing, you have endoderm, ectoderm, and the middle piece is the mesoderm. That's what helps everything stay connected. And so fascia is often regarded as a mesokinetic organ, meaning it's everything that's derived from the mesoderm. Way more information than you need. I realize that. So again, we can stick with the simple analogy that it's the thing that binds everything. It's the unifying field that connects.
I remember my yoga teacher, yin yoga teacher, he was saying it's like the saran wrap that wraps everything from your cell to your muscle. You're just like a big bag of soup, and it's the saran wrap that's holding you together.
That's right, very simply. And for the longest time, it was only viewed as a compartment, as a container. Now, we also know that it's actually a contractile tissue. So if someone has a torn tendon, you can still generate force because you can transmit force through the fascia, not just through the muscles to generate force. And not only is it a compartment and a contractile tissue, but it's also has the ability to change its morphology, meaning its density, its quality, its characteristic. It can be very supple or it can be very rigid. Like clay, you can model it all kinds of different ways. And if you put it in heat, it becomes very fixed and rigid. The neat thing with fascia is that it has the ability to be anything within the whole spectrum, and how it chooses to express is based on the forces that are imposed on it. So let's look at what is fascia. Fascia is a colloid. What that means is that it's a liquid and solids coexisting together. So the solid aspect of fascia, the fibrous aspect, you've got the cells, and you also have collagen, mostly type 1 collagen, which is the most abundant protein in your entire body. Now, collagen, it has a triple helix structure. This is where we start to refer to fascia as a liquid crystal, because there's this crystallinity in the collagen throughout the body that makes up this tissue. The other solid pieces are elastin, and that's what gives us our flexibility, the ability to stretch the skin. And that can be stretched up to 230 times its length and maintain integrity. You know, you stretch your ear and it bounces back. Now, interesting thing with collagen, again, the predominant part of the solid aspect of fascia, is that gram for gram, type 1 is the most common, it's stronger than steel. That's phenomenal. It can actually resist up to 2,200 pounds of torque per square inch. So then people go, how can you manipulate this? It's because we're not addressing the fascia and trying to override the fascia. We're communicating with it through its receptors, the mechanoreceptors, and we can get into that later on. So that's the solid aspect of fascia. Mostly collagen-based, provides structure and support. Think of it as the masculine aspect. The feminine aspect provides nutrition and communication. So this is the liquid aspect of fascia. You have about 15 liters of interstitial fluid circulating throughout your body. And this is how information gets delivered. So you can start to see why we're referring to this as a liquid crystal, because fascia is in fact a conduit. It's a conduit for information. It's a conduit for consciousness. This is some of the stuff that Ryan can speak to a little bit more in depth about. And one of the unique qualities about fascia being a liquid crystal is that it can create something known as a piezoelectric effect. Whenever you push down on any part of the body, this mechanical force creates an electrical impulse that's sent through light. Your body's literally communicating through light. And then that sends a chemical response wherever it goes to in the body. Again, this is more information than we need to say. What I'll cap this with, it's a solid and a liquid. Solid aspect gives you structure and support. Liquid aspect provides nutrition and communication.
So let me see if I can summarize this, make sure that I've received it. So the fascia is actually a tissue. It's a system, it's a structure that extends throughout the entire body. It's adaptive, meaning it has liquid and solid qualities to it. It receives information and then responds intelligently according to those impulses. And you can actually engage with it in intelligent ways to create new patterns throughout the whole system.
Yeah.
Yes, in fact, you are floating in a sea, an ocean of tension and compression. A quality about these bodies is that when we look at biotensegrity, the principle that all living matter is based off of, our soft tissue, we're in a constant state of tension, continuous tension, with discontinuous compression. So our inherent nature is to be expansive, is to be light in both senses of the word.
Yeah. I'd love to give some practical understanding to those viewers. I know we just dropped a lot of science on them. And what really helped me understand fascia was when we were with you, you were giving us the example of like the head being really heavy. And if it's out of alignment, it's really heavy. So your body creates scaffolding. And
yeah, you know what? I'll be happy to give you that analogy. And then I really do want to pass it over to Ryan because he's got some really great things to say about all this too. That'll complement, it'll segue well. So your head weighs about 12 pounds. Now, it's been determined that for every inch forward out of alignment, it can add up to 10 pounds of force to the weight of the head because of the vector of force. So if my head is 1 inch too far forward, it's now a 22-pound head. 2 inches forward, it's now a 32-pound head. 3 inches, 42-pound head. You get the idea. So why does this become comfortable? You would think if my head now weighs 42 pounds, why is my nature now to be forward head like this and this is comfortable, and going into proper alignment feels uncomfortable? It's hard. It's because the fascia is always listening and always responding to what it thinks we want. And it only knows what it thinks we want based on how we show up. So when we're not consciously engaged with ourselves and just kind of going through motions, think of how often you spend driving, sitting behind a car, looking at your phone, maybe side sleeping, doing all these things that compress you forward. Your body starts to think that that's what you want. And so the body says, you know what? Your head is 2 inches forward. That means you have a 32-pound head. This takes a lot of muscular active energy use to support. The body is like nature. It's all about conservation of energy. It doesn't want to use up all that extra energy you've got on holding your head forward. So it says, you know what? I have a solution for us. What we'll do is we'll recruit the fascia, we'll increase the density here, and we'll create some scaffolds. And by creating these scaffolds, this can now be comfortable. And you know what? We'll actually save energy because you won't have to use your muscles to hold your head here. We'll encase you here. And now you can hold it passively. And now this becomes comfortable. So your body says you're welcome. So short term, great. But what that means in the long term is more and more compression through key areas, especially communication from brain to the rest of the body. And over time, these can lead to all kinds of really nasty dysfunctions because the nature of fascia, without new intervention, it'll continue to perpetuate what state that's already developed. So if you're like this, you will become more and more and more encased in this position. And now it takes a lot of active effort to come back. So that's why it's not enough to just change your movement patterns. Because if these holds are now established, I'm constantly going to be in a tug of war against myself. And if we just remove them with the manual therapy, but we don't train how to move more appropriately, the body knows what it knows, the conscious mind knows what it knows, it goes back to what's familiar. What's familiar is this. And then the body will just recreate those holds. So that's why the two dovetail together. And that's a big reason why we get a lot of long-term success with people who come through the program. Anyway, I'll pass it on to Ryan because I'm sure he has a lot of great things to say.
Amazing. Thank you. Let me just jump in there for 1 second before we segue over, because this is really beautiful for our community. When we go into these spaces, whether it's with plant medicine or without it in some sort of coaching practice or guidance, we're engaging in some sort of transformative process where we're kind of breaking up the holding patterns on a psycho-emotional level. And one of the things that you gave to us when we came back is you actually suggested that we rearrange our physical space so that we don't fall into the old patterns that we've had before, as a symbolic but also practical adjustment in our system. And a lot of people who have sat with us, you know, myself included, people who sit in plant medicine ceremonies, you go through these huge transformations and then you enter back in the world and it's almost like you're in the same mold again, but something fundamental has shifted. And so how do you reconcile the different realms that are at play right here on like a psycho-emotional level and a physical level? How does fascia weave its way into, you know, the power of the subconscious mind and holding patterns as they extend throughout other areas of our life?
All right. So fascia, another part of fascia. Fascia acts very much like the subconscious mind. It's the largest sensory organ in the body, so it's got more sensory input than the eye. It makes up for 20% of your body weight. It touches every single cell, organ, and part of the body in different multiple layers. So how the fascia works is it communicates through piezoelectric mechanical input. And through these mechanical input, it sends signals of what it should do. How you hold your structure and how you move, I'm sure everyone's aware of. If you're having a bad day and you're slouched over, you kind of feel bad. When you adjust your posture and sit up, your mood starts to change a little bit. Now we can get into this as how we move is usually how we're thinking or feeling. And we do that subconsciously. We are 95% subconscious autonomic beings. So if you're driving your car down the street and you're anytime you're in thought, thinking of past or future, you're running programs of that driving. It's like when you first started to drive, you were hyper aware, trying to look at this, learning when you're 16 or 17, you know, like watch out for the car. You start to build programs and they become autonomic so that you don't need to be in that awareness, so you can expand your awareness onto other things. So if you think about that in walking and movement as well, we record so many different processes throughout our life, and that's recorded in our structure. The fascia responds how we interact with it, piezoelectric through mechanical input. So if we're autonomic beings and thinking subconsciously, we're also moving subconsciously. And this is creating programs almost in a language pattern of how we move. These programs, how we move, signals specific thoughts. Thoughts then signal specific emotions. And if you guys are familiar with pain body, or patterns or subconscious patterns, things like this. Usually if we've had a trauma or something, we may be in a subconscious pattern and sit and pace and move in a specific way. This relays our brain to create a chemical response to the cells which become addicted to this pattern through specific chemicals, and how we move, we're feeding this pattern. And if something scares us or stares us, we sit up and we become conscious again, we adjust our body and it breaks that pattern for a moment. So with movement and with fascia, you're able to actually interact through how you move and interact with your fascia and be conscious during these moments. So there's a meditation technique that I like to throw at people is you can't feel your feet and think at the same time when you're walking. So if you're focused on feeling your feet when you're walking, you can't think at the same time. And this is a really good exercise to practice with yourself, because as you're engaged in the present moment and feeling your movement patterns, you're in that 5% conscious awareness. That's where you're learning how to drive in the beginning. That's where you're looking at all the cars around, learning how to drive. And as you start to build these patterns, they become subconscious so that they run, so you can expand your awareness and start to interact with the world continually. When we are born, the first 7 years in life, we are in a theta state. And a theta state is very similar to a hypnotic state. So at that time in our first 7 years of life, we're absorbing things. We haven't really developed the alpha state or the low frequency beta state, which we're at now. So we're absorbing. We're not only absorbing what our parents, what our environment, and what the people we hang around, what we see on TV and things in different aspects and religion and patterns, we're also absorbing movement patterns. And you guys can kind of like, maybe as an experiment, look at this, like, do you move like your mother or father? Do you move like your friends? Do they do certain things, certain leans, certain things like this? You record these movement patterns, and then you start to take these movement patterns subconsciously. And these are also attached to the subconscious mind, which are attached to emotions and patterns, and you start playing these out. And I may fall off my bike and hurt my knee, you know, and I start protecting my knee. And instead of engaging with that sense of pain is a signal for us to give it attention. I'm taught to get away from my emotions, away from my pain, which society has taught us. And I teach by pushing myself and leaning to one side, by not thinking about what I'm doing, getting away from the pain. I'm telling my fascia that that's what I wanted to do mechanically, because I'm moving my body in this way. It's starting to communicate, and then it rebuilds the structure around that dysfunction. And then as I heal, I carry that dysfunction in my subconscious pattern. So if I'm driving my car and I'm leaning to one side, every time I'm thinking, that's my style of driving. You guys have seen people, you know how you drive. So it's the same as walking. And we put these patterns in. It's not our fault. Our parents come from a generation, and their generation, they may have been farmers, they may have been dentists, they may have been anything where they had a specific movement pattern, and they were accessing a specific type of information. Then a lot of times in our earlier days, we didn't have the access to the internet. We didn't have access to worldwide information. So whatever patterns and things and ideas that were taught and passed down to us through religion and Edward Bernays and how he's the father of propaganda and different things to buy that we may have thought were healthy back then, we found out they're completely opposite now. There's a massive amount of programming that was done, and that's passed generationally down. And these programs are passed to us and stored within our movement pattern as a language, and then in our subconscious. Mm-hmm. So as we start to do this work, the reason why we can't just change things with our movement pattern, as Stefan was saying, because we're working against those the structural change. You can even notice, like if you've carried a purse or a bag your whole life on one side, your fascia will literally start to structure to hold that up. And as you get older, your body will literally morph to that way. And every time you're carrying that purse, you're probably thinking the same thoughts you were thinking the last 10 years, repetitive thoughts. As like 80 to 90% of our thoughts are things that 70,000 thoughts per day is things that we've been thinking for 10 years or 20 years before that. And a lot of Dispenza's work really highlights that. Yeah. That is in our movement too. So when we change our movement patterns, we're only conscious for about 5% of the day, 5% of the time, right? So then we go back to our subconscious program. So it's very difficult to change these things. With the fascial contouring intentional movement, we're able to break down these scaffolds over a period of time between the collagen regrowth cycle. So the collagen regrows between 48 and 72 hours, and it's going to grow back to its original form to where it was, unless you have an intervention or that you continually break it down to a point where it needs new information. So when you break down the fascia through fascial contouring and start to introduce like different movement patterns of intentional movement, how to move properly, you're changing the environment so that you're no longer in a protective state, you're going into a growth state. And as you change your movement patterns, you start to hack the subconscious. And instead of always being like this and stuck in repetitive thoughts and subconscious patterns, you now have the ability to hack into the body and change your movement patterns. So if you are thinking of something, a pain body or cycle may come up, you're actually able to change the position of your body because it's not being held. Hold that and become conscious. It's almost like feeling your feet and walking at the same time. You can now have the proper new muscles that haven't been engaged for a long time in structure to change your structure, which through piezoelectric is creating a new electrical chemical response within the body, which is reprogramming the cells and the memory for the subconscious patterns. So you're able to do that by changing your body position, which now you can change the way you walk. Even after these treatments, stepping into your same shoes with the same shoe pattern is going to make you through proprioception, which Deos mentioned, proprioception is 70% felt through feet. So if we step into our same foot patterns after we get treatment, we tend to fall into certain patterns of walking, which is certain patterns of thinking. If you see somebody walking really fast outside, they're thinking in the future. If somebody's walking slow, they've got their day planned. How we walk and how we move is usually a representation of how we're thinking, and how we think goes back to how we're feeling, because thoughts communicate to the body through emotion. Mm-hmm. And then this is recorded, and then we go back to our patterns, which are 95% of the time. So we kind of like walk into this world artery with some patterns, and this is like our first time in history and generations over the last decade or so where we're actually able to do some real work and pass it down onto generations and do some real healing and work. So anyone sitting here attracted to this work is really, we're creating huge changes within our species now. So that's a little bit of that to get a kind of an idea of it, but
yeah. I was going to say, I'd love to give my living example of how my life transformed to this, because it's like, this is a lot of science, and it's like, yeah. And how does this apply to my day-to-day life? What does this mean? And I really love connecting this to basically the word trauma. Like when something has happened to us, part of our conditioning is those challenging life experiences that, say we were bullied at school, or we lived at home where home wasn't safe, parents were abusive or yelled a lot. We potentially made ourselves small as a protective mechanism, but then we didn't grow out of that. And if you're at home listening and you shrug your shoulders and make yourself small for 10 seconds, you start to feel insecure and scared, maybe a little bit anxious. And then now the fascia has grown into this. Yes. Because of a past experience. That experience is gone, but now the fascia is constantly telling the body it's not safe. Look out, be small, be insecure. And all of a sudden we have social anxiety and we're not so sure of ourselves. We doubt everything. We procrastinate because the body's actually now informing the mind. And what I noticed after, we ripped up that fascia in me, my posture, I kind of slouched a little bit, and I tried so hard, but for 3 seconds I could do this, and then it went back to this. And after ripping it up, which I can't wait to tell you guys about that experience. When I came home, all of a sudden I was open, and I wasn't procrastinating anymore. Procrastination just doesn't exist. I'm able to look at somebody in the eyes while we're having a conversation and be present and focused without having self-conscious thoughts come up. And I didn't even realize that I had self-conscious thoughts come up before. I was like, wow, I'm actually feeling really confident and centered in myself while listening to this person. And I'm not doubting myself at all. And wow, this is a new experience. And feeling that new level of confidence through my body, and relaxation and strength and vitality, all just from shifting the body, like ripping that up. And so this makes me question, when you're at home listening, how many of your thoughts are actually your thoughts, but just memories being shot up from the body? And how much of it is actually unprocessed emotion that we often think we come into these spaces and we're thinking, I have so much trauma and I just need to work through my trauma. I need to express my emotions. And how much of it is actually unexpressed emotions, but just the body reinforming? It's just the loop.
That's our recorder. The body, the fascia is recording everything we do. Mm-hmm. So that's our subconscious mind. So we're able to change our movement and really hack that. And like even before, like trying to like sit up straight, not knowing how to do it because your the fascia's been in a certain way. And if you do sit down, like you're saying, in childhood or trauma, or you're getting yelled at like this, how long do you spend there thinking of the same thing? And the body becomes addicted in this loop, and the pain body starts to live until you become conscious. Mm-hmm. And this is almost a language. It's a true body language, which is communicating. 95% of the time sitting here, and you're like, it feeds, the pain body feeds, and then it goes dormant until you get set off again. And it's something uncomfortable, and you don't have the tools to really like sit with it consciously and watch it and just observe.
And this is basically what comes up in ceremony in a nutshell. Like as all of these holding patterns are released, whether it's connected to stored trauma or memories from the past locked in the body, it can go into spontaneous movements like tremoring, or emotions can rise up to be released, or a lot of different things can happen. Even like mucus and things can actually start coming out of the body as it's purging all of these things that are being held. And a lot of them are actually unconscious. A lot of them are things that people didn't even know that they were holding on to, connecting to other areas of their lives. And all of a sudden those connection points are brought into the forefront of awareness as these things are passing through. So I'm curious, because the whole field of body-centered psychotherapy is relatively new on our planet. Like prior to that, it was a lot of talk therapy. We're trying to figure out like the inner workings of the mind, and then that Freudian approach kind of led into the Jungian approach, which then started evolving into different forms of body-centered psychotherapy. And in our world right now, breath work is really starting to open up as a way of regulating the nervous system. And I'm curious why we don't actually hear more. Actually, this is kind of like a two-part question. Why don't we hear more about the fascia? Because it sounds like fascia is a fundamental component of all of these holding patterns. Why isn't this more commonly spoke about and addressed in regards to body-centered treatments? And what do you do with the fascia? Like, how do you actually restructure it if it just springs back into its holding pattern? What do you guys actually do? How do you work with the fascia?
That's a first. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. So I can answer the first question for you. Doctors don't learn about this. They cut through it. It's not in medical school. They don't even have a week on it. They don't learn about any of this. We are based on an old structure that things need to be tested, and we come from a paradigm and a system where we don't create cures, we create treatments. And as you heard Stefan talk a little slice of this, it's a lot for people to really understand, and it hasn't had the permission to be really dived into, and not a lot of people actually dive into it because their livelihoods are based on like what they've gone to school for, to learn chiropractic, medical school and all this, and all of a sudden to be like, hey, it's not exactly how we were taught, or this new science is here. It goes against an old paradigm which has a bottleneck to it. It takes a long time before new science, it just moves very fast and through politics of how things are. And, you know, Stefan and Phil and all of us were in here for the last 6 months, 2 years, whatever, and just learning things because of the treatments we were doing on each other, the advancements we were doing on each other, because we were in there and learning and applying, and in there and learning and applying without asking permission. You know, we were in there opening things up. The universe was showing us things, so many new insights and everything.
So you guys were your own test subjects for this.
We were definitely our own test subjects. So yeah, we made it safe for you guys, but like we definitely dived into a lot of things, a lot of releases, emotions, conductivity, frequency. I've had experience very similar to medicine while I've had my fascia opened up, and understanding what pain, we look at pain like it's all pain. I have shoulder pain, I have back pain, I have knee pain, I have neck pain, my arm hurts. But each pain, if you actually truly give it attention, is a little melody, it's a symphony, it's a signal, it's speaking different. Every type of pain is speaking completely different, and it's probably been trying to talk to you for a long time. It's your body's way of communicating back. I need attention, and we need to give attention to this to heal it together. Where your attention goes, energy flows. You know, and there's a lot of modalities where attention is given to a certain place, and that place starts to heal. So it's the same idea. The massive amount of programming through our species has been counterproductive for us to truly evolve into the modalities that are actually healing. Mm-hmm. And that is because of many factors that I won't get into, but it's new sciences take a long time to get in, and usually by the time they get in, a lot of people get hurt by the time they get in by doing old sciences. So.
Mm-hmm. And so in the second part of the question, what are we doing to the fascia? We're helping bring conscious awareness into different parts of the body, because that's actually one of the most powerful healing pieces, is quite simply conscious awareness focused on different parts of yourself. It's a powerful nutrient, and it's very effective at unwinding and unlocking different patterns. Once you know, you can't unknow. So if we look at a flower, let's just start with an imagery, and the flower is not doing well. Do we need to change anything to the flower directly? Or is it that we need to change the environment? Often what we'll find is by changing the environment, all of a sudden now the flower can flourish, whatever the factor was. Maybe it was a little bit more light, different soil, but there was nothing wrong with the flower itself. So with the fascia, what we're doing is we're identifying where are certain holding patterns in the body. And these holding patterns have formed either through trauma, either through misengagement or disengagement. And these are things that are fed through the subconscious programs. And I really like what Ryan was alluding to earlier about, it's not so much heredity, it's more mimicry that causes some of these issues. You know, down the family line, oh, I have bad knees because my mom had bad knees or my dad had bad knees. Well, look at their movement patterns. You mimic them. And so we need to be really important. It's not what we do, it's how we do it that can set us up for success or set us up for destruction. Name any sport, even walking could potentially devastate your body depending on how you're walking. So what are we doing to the fascia? We identify where these holding patterns are, and then we start accessing the tissues. A lot of the treatment is done oil-free so that we can really engage with this tissue properly. And we engage with it a number of different ways. One of the ways we engage is by creating some compressive forces. And what that does, it's really interesting. Robert Schleip did a lot of studies. He's a researcher based out of Germany at the University of Ulm. And it's one of the leading fascial research centers there. And what they discovered is that when you press down on soft tissue, it has a sponge-like reaction where you press down like a sponge, it's like squeezing the sponge out, and then when you let go, it can saturate again. So one of the parts of the technique of this method is to wring out the sponge, identify these areas that have just been stagnant and congested and wring them out so that we can start introducing new nutrients into these spaces. And after we do that, we start to change how the tissues engage with each other. And that's done through a different technique. Because what we've realized is when we create a tensional force, a lift force through the tissues, that's targeted, performed in a focused way where the participant is also engaged with the movement. Now what we find is we can actually start to create new patterns for the tissues, new ways for it to understand how to react and respond. Because that's all fascia is ever doing, is just responding. So we're bringing you back to a baseline. And so when we create a tensional force, let's bring in another image, the image of a spider's web. You see that? Mm-hmm. Now, how does the web form? How is it broken down? A lot of it, unless there's external factors, is through the spider itself. It has the ability to spool out more web. It has the ability to break down the web. The spider of fascia is called a fibroblast. Now the fibroblast has the ability to spool out collagen. It can also secrete something called collagenase, which eats up the collagen, breaks it down. It's also the medic, it's also the demolition crew, it's all the things. It's the janitor, it's the builder. And so one thing to keep in mind is the body's always refreshing, regenerating. So fascia is always being spooled out. The collagen is always being spooled out to a certain degree. And what educates it on how to align and orient is actually movement. And so we work together with this method, with you moving through space so that we can start to remind the fascia how we want it to actually orient and align. And the way we do it also ends up creating more lubrication for these tissues, because the way we engage with the tissue actually creates a condition where the fibroblast becomes a fasciocyte, and the fasciocyte starts to produce more hyaluronic acid, and that's a lubricating fluid for the tissues. And so this allows us to really recreate and resculpt you in a sense, and you can really feel it.
You certainly can. The way I describe it to people is like it feels like you're ripping the body. And it's interesting because I want to share this story because this is really profound for me in receiving these treatments. So in certain areas, it's really, really painful. And in other areas, I was getting like these endorphin releases of pleasure almost. And then other areas were neutral. But one of the fascinating things is when you would like grab an area of the body and cause lift, and you would ask us to actually roll into the pressure or the tension, and it hit a pocket of incredible pain. There was so much in my system that wanted to get away from that pain, but the invitation to actually move into it created like this interference pattern in my system where at first it was resisting it, and then it felt really confused because I was moving into it. And then about halfway through the session, and this happened a few sessions in a row, about halfway through the session, it's like the body just kind of gave up. And when the body gave up and it realized that there was no escape from what was happening, that's when emotions started percolating up. And the whole journey was about coming back to the breath, being present with sensation, and just surrendering fully to the movement into these areas that I clearly had not been exploring for a long period of time. And after some of the sessions, I would come out of it in a totally altered state of consciousness. Some of the sessions I felt really emotionally raw and depleted. Other ones I felt like really, really spacious and open and fluid in my system. There's like this huge spectrum of experience that was happening from receiving these treatments. And so I love how you describe that about like there's the pressing into like the sponge and the wringing it out, and then there's also the lift, and then the moving into these areas combined with the intentional movement to actually reinform the whole system to create new patterns and to lubricate and actually to build a new structure. So it's like the breaking down of the old structures, the flushing out of all of those toxins and holding patterns, and then the creation of new patterns so that you can actually build your crystalline structure from the ground up.
And that's the great thing to touch on, is that there was never anything wrong with it. Like, you know, is it cloudy there today, or are you seeing some sunshine?
Yeah, sunshine
Yeah,
cloud.
it was sunny earlier. It's cloudy now.
Yeah, it comes and goes, but at any point in the day, is the sun shining any brighter or less? Not at all. The sun is always brilliant and shining brightly, but clouds come and go and create the illusion as though there's no more sun. So all that to say, this conductive network, this matrix that makes you up, is incredibly powerful and efficient transmitter transducer.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there's just dampeners that form on it. Like a guitar, if all of a sudden there's some gunk on those strings, the resonance starts to get compromised.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're doing is just getting some of those inhibitors out of the way, removing the inhibitions, so that we can allow this matrix to express itself fully the way it was designed to, the way it was meant to.
I noticed in the work, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the areas where we have those deep holding patterns, the fascia is really thick. And for me, it was around my hips and my legs. And I've always had pain, probably for the last 3 years. My legs would just be in pain, which is gone now, by the way. All of that is gone. But when we were digging into it, and yeah, the ego usually wants to run away from pain. It avoids pain, right? So we go for the painkillers. We do everything to not feel the pain. And this practice, we're told to roll into it. And anytime we roll into pain, we get past the wall, we're actually able to sense what's underneath it. It's like a mindfulness practice. When we sit with something, it transforms. And I noticed in those really dense pockets, there was rage or grief or sadness or just emotions that I didn't even have. They didn't have a name, but they felt so old and so deep. And it's like, is there a connection between emotional holding patterns, things that we haven't processed that have been suppressed, and the fascia?
So Ryan will answer this very well. And one thing I'd like to share just prior to that is that as the energy in these areas is stagnant. Now, a lot of people, when they think of the word stagnant, they think of stillness, but it's not at all that. If you look up in Chinese medicine, the term stagnant is this. It's a point of high irritation. The energy is trapped. It can't move, but it can't settle either. It just stays irritated and aggravated. And it's not until we can turn around and move into it and see it that it can be released.
Okay, so we can go back to like traumas.
Yeah, Ryan, would you mind speaking into the microphone?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. So when we go back to the actual initial traumas, so when we program our subconscious mind, when we learn new things, it usually takes about 21 days. Most of us know that to get a new pattern and habit. That's usually how the fascia works as well, you know, or patterns with things. Or we'll have traumas, which download will fall off our bike or get scared, and through that trauma we'll actually imprint something and not really know how to get away from it. It's very interesting because emotional trauma and things that you're talking about, different emotions in dark places, our mind tries to figure out what it is all the time. It's like, what does that mean? It must mean this, and then create a concept based on lack of information, and which cuts us off from actually feeling and experiencing that emotion. And the first time you really go into it and start to experience and feel it, you don't really know what to do with it. It's something new. I haven't seen this for a while. There's rage there. All of these things were things that were there creating this. So if you go back to the cell can either be in a growth state or it can be in a protection state. It cannot be in both. When you're in a parasympathetic state, you're in a growth state always. When you're in a sympathetic nervous system state, you're in a protection state. This means that the cells cannot divide when they're in a protection state. The cells don't divide, they start to break down, and you're using old cells. So if you look at this as like, if you've had a trauma or a body position or a situation which you've been holding on to a long time, the fascia starts to build around this dysfunction and protect it, because you're always trying to get away from it. You have rage, and all these things are being stored within these pockets of the fascia, and they become an entity that actually become a living, clever creature that needs to continually feed, which is similar to a pain body. But this is why we see the fascia as the subconscious mind, because we're actually through our childhood and things that we've been passed down and training in society teaches us to get away from our feelings to resist them, to identify with them, to identify with pain. Like I have knee pain, I'm a knee pain sufferer, or like creating an ego identification with things. We're actually creating these pain body entities which are stored within the fascia. And when you go in, all these emotions that are coming out in rages are actually low vibrational frequencies that you put into the fascia. And if you think the fascia almost like a guitar string, so you're clicking the guitar string and it's a low vibration. And that guitar string, in order to continue playing that song and that melody of pain, it needs to keep being strung like that. And that's what you've created is a chemical response to that area within the cells that wants to stay in a protection state because you've been telling it that's what you want it to do. It continually wants to feed like a pain body, feed. And we build around this dysfunction our entire lives, and we create these pockets everywhere within us. And that's when we start to open this up, and when we're able to view it and not conceptualize it, not tell it what it is, put it somewhere, we view a string. And what happens to a guitar string when we flick it and we just watch it? It starts to calm down and starts to release. And then we may get triggered by somebody else or things and other people that are at that same frequency, family, traumas, things like that, that they both want to feed that guitar string. So it's both going in you. So what you're actually doing is these traumas, how we look at these traumas and how we're taught from a very young age to deal with pain, getting away from pain, emotion, and everything, has caused all these things within our body. And now we have certain modalities, and going into it and actually going in and viewing it consciously. We're viewing the string without flicking it, and it takes time, and then we release that. So you notice like certain releases that'll happen, and that pain has been held there. It's not pain. It's your body screaming for attention. It's your body screaming for consciousness, awareness, to view it, but you've been protecting it so long. Yes.
Pain's the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger.
It's just a messenger, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if you guys could share some of the major transformations that you've seen in some of the people that you've worked with. And just doing a time check, it's we're getting close to 3 o'clock, so I'm just I'd like to kind of like steer it kind of in the direction of how people can reach
okay.
it. But
well, very simply and quickly, peripheral side effects of tuning this system and bringing it back to a more coherent, balanced state include aesthetic improvements. So it's quite common to see people's faces, like the wrinkles going away. We have 5 male cases and 1 female case. She's in her 40s, where their hair is actually regrown. And that's made us realize that, oh, perhaps not all balding is chemical based, but some of it, maybe it's just purely a supply and demand nutrient waste exchange compromise because of these dams that build up.
Based on the neck forward.
You know, gains in height are quite common, and actually significant inch reductions throughout the waist and other parts of the body, to the point where we used to do before and after measurements with a tape measurer. But sometimes people just wouldn't believe us when we're like, yeah, you've actually lost cumulatively about 12 inches. That we ended up actually getting a 3D body scanner. So now because people would say, oh, you're just squeezing the tape measure tighter. But now we can see that no, in fact, you actually are morphing and changing. And it's really fascinating to see how you look differently, a different air, a different confidence comes out in people as they start to be freed from their old patterns. So a lot of aesthetic benefits in that regard. Others, performance improvements, hitting new personal bests, feeling stronger with what feels like equal or less effort because you're distributing force more efficiently throughout the body. And then we're also getting a lot of advantages with pain and dysfunction reduction. So just general livelihood, like a lot of people say, I have cold and numb extremities. Cold is usually a sign that there's a circulation issue. Numb is usually a sign that there's a nerve issue. And people who have swelling in extremities, that's usually a sign that there's a lymph vessel issue. So by decongesting these areas that are bunged up, we can now help restore some of these functions. So pain and dysfunction, performance, and aesthetics are 3 key areas that people improve.
That can tune in through heightened sensory input, awareness around yourself and with what you're doing in your patterns. Basically, our bodies, we're not advancing. We're getting back to our original blueprint before this technological age came in, and we started walking on concrete floors and getting down in little cars and looking at our phones and everything. Like the advantages that our species has is unimaginable. And we're getting back to like being able to use your body again. Like it's like jumping into a new body and being able to feel things and hit muscles and move yourself in specific ways you had no idea. Like it's like unlocking new parts of the body, and that's been across the board for people. And it's tough to learn as you get older. You know, it takes some time, but by taking down all the scaffolds and structures, it holds you accountable to be conscious and to actually look within that pain and hear what it has to do. And it's like an uncomfortable meditation after, which teaches you accountability for the first time. You know,
I like that. It's an uncomfortable meditation for sure.
I'd also like
Zen style, you know.
Add to the list of benefits. I don't know if you've experienced, but so on top of that, I noticed my digestion improved because we also did fascial work on the digestive system. So there's less bloating. I've lost inches around my waist too. I got taller, but also feeling more vitality in my body. It's like you also say my body starts moving me versus I'm moving my body. It kind of has like a spring action to it, kind of like more. All the joints are well oiled. It's like a well oiled machine finally that I'm enjoying living in my body again. There's a levity to it. It's not as heavy or dense. And then mood. I didn't expect that. I kind of expected it because I knew the connection between body posture and mind, but less procrastination. But I would summarize it as stronger will. Like I have a stronger will to move forward with the actions and choices I actually want to do versus with the default conditioning of before. Just stronger will and more confidence.
I think
it's interesting you say will too, because the first thing that we start to teach people is the transverse abdominis, and that is the will chakra, where you need to step in, and that's really translated through the work.
Things that I've noticed the most. Sorry, go ahead, Stefan.
I was just going to quickly touch about the scars. People with C-sections, a lot of women with C-sections working through some of those scars have also had similar accounts of these types of experiences with will and drive. And the interesting thing, if you look at the meridian channels, that one that gets cut with the cesarean is connected to exactly those pieces as well. Go ahead, Diaz.
Yeah, the thing that I noticed and the thing I appreciated like all the way back at the beginning when we first had our conversation, Stefan, is it's ties to consciousness. Like this is what fascinates me most about being human just in general, is recognizing that none of us are actually humans. We're actually just occupying this human vessel and we don't even know how it works really. We're learning all the different mechanisms of this human vessel. And I loved the conversation that we had when we were first discussing this about the crystalline liquid crystal of the fascia and how it's a transmitting receiving station for consciousness, and how this is what these matrices, I don't know what plural is for that, but this is what they do. It's like an antenna for different vibrational frequencies. And one of the things that I've noticed is just a very different state of consciousness wherein I'm getting access to information or thoughts or perceptions that I've never had before, that I don't want to go too in detail about, because it's actually quite alien. It's quite, people who have been in ceremony with us hear me talk about it often, but just to
I've got some stuff to tell you after.
Yeah, actually like receiving these downloads in really, really profound ways connected to existence beyond this physical form, about like these vibrational frequencies coming in and actually helping me tune into thoughts or vibrational states beyond what I've been holding on to in the past. That's primarily what I've noticed.
And then developing that ability to tune to different frequencies.
Yeah.
Tapping into the multidimensional consciousness that you are.
Yeah.
We're all just tuning forks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember, I think day 6 of our treatment, we were talking about a sponge and like ripping up the fascia. We're like ripping up the subconscious mind and all the conditionings of this vessel that were imprinted throughout my life. And that 6th day was the hardest. It was like my psyche dumped all its negative conditioning into my conscious mind. And I was inundated by all this like psychic mental filth. and it was like, blah. And that day I had so many bowel movements. It was just like huge dumping, like literally out of the system. And then when we come home, like crystalline structure, attuned to a higher vibration, and now these cleaner thoughts are coming through, cleaner way of living, higher awareness. It's an incredible, like, practically, yes, we're restructuring the physical body, emotional detox, physical detox, and then a real like spiritual expansion.
And also relational patterns, like, again, not going into the full story about this, but certain relational things were coming up with Aga and myself while we were out there in Victoria, like different patterns that have been propagated not only by us, but by our parents, like this whole dynamic between like this masculine force and this feminine force as it's relating to each other from our patterns started rising up that needed to be processed and addressed by us relationally. So I'm seeing a lot of different similarities between the work that we were doing with you guys out in Victoria and the work that we do in the ceremony space. It's just approaching it from different vantage points.
It was like a 9-day ceremony or 10-day ceremony. There was a purge, there was feeling fabulous, there was emotional releases, insights.
You know, we could do some like super getaways sometime and do the whole package, right?
Well, this is what we're thinking about. We really want to like bring you guys over here. I know with COVID happening, I don't know what that is going to look like, but to partner this with breath work and potentially some bufo, to really restructure the body, both physically, emotionally, mentally, and like create a package. That's what we want to offer our community.
Yeah, because this is something that we don't actually really address all that often through the medicine work that we do, is actually working with the physical form and restructuring it. And this is one of the reasons why I mentioned and why I really appreciated the suggestion to actually reform our bedroom, like our physical space when we got home, and to introduce all of these physical practices to create new holding patterns that actually support health and optimizing the whole system from the inside out. Because that's a certain piece that I think a lot of people could really benefit from who are working in these fields. So on that note, I did just want to open it up to anyone else here on the call who had any questions. Ramneet, I know you just hopped on, so you're just kind of catching the tail end, but Judy or Josh, did either of you have any questions that you wanted to ask Stefan or Ryan while we're here on this call?
Just raise your hand.
Raise your hand or type something in the chat box.
In the meantime, what I'll share while they're formulating that is we didn't really touch at all on intentional movement, and that's part of where this levity comes from that you were mentioning, because what you learn through a new way of engaging is how to distribute force more efficiently. And the more safely force gets distributed around joints, the more synergistic, complementary that force gets distributed, you start to feel a little more of a sense of decompression and decompaction around your joints. And eventually the overlay to that is feeling this sense of lightness, effortless effort, ease as you move through space.
Mm-hmm. And it's such an important piece, because I realized none of us are taught how to actually move our body. We've been taught incorrectly. I showed some of the practices to one of my roommates. I'm like, do you want to see how to actually engage your leg when you walk? I showed her that little piece with the knee, and she was like, oh my God, I'm sweating after like 3 reps. Like, this is intense work. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, you don't even need your dumbbells, like just a wall, and properly engage every single muscle intentionally. Like, yeah.
This is something we like to emphasize. You have all the tools. They are all inside. It's just helping you remember how to use them and access them. As Dea said, we're not humans, but we did choose to come here for a human experience, and we're helping create the user manual.
Yeah.
This is a body. This is how you use it.
I'm also studying chemontic science right now and learning some modalities with that, so that will be applied to the work later.
Cool.
To the avatar.
Nice. So I don't see any questions here. So maybe you guys could just give a little rundown of where people can find you and some of the things that you got coming up, because I know you guys are transitioning into something pretty exciting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently, well, one thing we'd really like some of your support with is we are developing an app. because we're recognizing so much is going into the digital sphere, and we realize that being the innovators, the creators and innovators of these methods, you can only find us in one location in the world. So to try and share some of these skill sets with you around the globe, we're developing an app called Pain Pal. And so, as we've been talking about, the method we use for manual therapy is fascial contouring. We've developed a version that you can do on yourself. We're calling it fascial self-release. And this will be delivered through this app. So our Indiegogo campaign is live, and I'm sure you guys can help us share that direct link. But if you go on Indiegogo and you put in Pain Pal, you'll find us, and you're welcome to support us. We've got a few early bird discounts on right now. And that'll be a great starting point. Other places you can find us is our website is one more resource for the center itself. And that's the letter I, letter M, FIT, reform.com. So again, IMFit, reform.com. And there's a little bit more information about what we're doing with the actual work here.
Cool.
Yeah, so the app is basically, it's not only the fascial self-release, but we're creating a system that allows to teach you based on our subconscious patterns. So it teaches you to be accountable. There's actually, if you guys have heard of Tamagotchi, you know, you have this little pet and you take care of it, it dies, my little sister will cry. So we create a Tamagotchi version of you, a Humaguchi. You gotta take care of it. You gotta check in and do your fascial work and drink water and check your posture, and that will reflect how well you're doing with it and record the data, and it will slowly teach you the process in a fun way, which now, based on times now, our attention span is very short. You know, our accountability is being stretched here and there, so many things going on. This app was designed to allow you to interact with it and teach you at your pace, slowly, and work away and teach you actually how to bring consciousness back into your body and also treat the pain. Well, we start with pain because pain is a signal. So putting attention there. So it's one of the first modalities that we're passing down through technology, and we're building and learning it based on that.
Great. And you can also find your intentional movement practices online as well, right? Through a membership?
Yeah, that's right. There is a Vimeo account. If you punch in intentional movement, IMFit, you'll see one of the links will populate to a Vimeo account. It's subscription based, and there's a 2-minute video for every one of the movements. So in the current basic flow, there's 3 movements for the neck, 3 for the core, 11 for the arms and 8 for the legs, so 25 altogether. And then there's also a flow sequence at the end that shows you how you link it all in about a 20-minute practice. And this is designed to really help isolate each joint so that you can really understand how to move safely through space in those areas. And then from there, you start overlaying that into day-to-day with integration. And that's where cues are really helpful. Personally, one of my cues is when I'm, every time I walk through a doorway, that's my cue to check in. Or my phone, I was realizing I was always collapsed and compressed when I look at my phone. So now I've made that a cue to check in and be more conscientious of how I'm holding my phone. Actually, on that note, Guy, I'd like to go back to what you were saying earlier about that position being like this. So no wonder there's so much anxiety and depressive qualities coming out in people. How many people, when they look at their phones, that's the default position you find yourself in? And one thing I'd like to share as a resource, actually there's 3, is Amy Cuddy, C-U-D-D-Y. She's done a lot of research around poses and posture. She's known for power poses. She has a few TED Talks about that subject. And that emphasizes how when you change your body position, certain chemical releases start to occur that really give you more confidence, more self-awareness, self-assuredness, and so on. And she gets into the science of that. So that's something to be aware of. Why that triggered my memory is because she was saying, if you're in a job interview, a lot of people are on their phones right before getting called in. That would be one of the worst things to do body position wise before you go in to try and make a good first impression. The other resource I'd like to guide you towards is an author named Candace Pert. She wrote Molecules of Emotion. She's one of the people who actually discovered endorphins. And then she had a follow-up book. It's called Your Body is Your Subconscious Mind. And then there's another great book as a resource to use called Your Body Speaks Your Mind by Deb Shapiro. Just again, showcasing parallels between how we show up in space and what that is reflecting or mirroring back to us. Like few examples, a lot of pain in the shoulders. Are you taking on too much, more than you can handle? Pain in the low back. Are you having issues feeling supported, maybe by your partner or financially or whatever it might be? And then it goes on, you get the idea.
Beautiful. Thank you. And maybe we can write those out and we can include it when we send out this video to our mailing list. And on that note, I'd also like to plant the seed again. We'd love to bring you guys over here to Vancouver sometime in the new year and see if we can join forces and create a really powerful transformational program for people.
Well, that'd be great. And any listeners out there, if you are interested in actually coming to the physical space and getting some work done, we are open for another couple months. So do try to get in the door sooner than later.
And you're in Victoria.
Otherwise, we'll be looking. Yeah, in Victoria.
Yeah,
Victoria.
We've had people like fly in from other countries. We've had people take the ferry over every 2 days to come into treatment because they had to go back to work.
It's worth it.
Once you realize what this is, you get it.
Yeah, it's a lot more than just going to receive a massage, as I hope you're all.
I was going to ask you, Bill, when you were talking about like going in and feeling like going in movement, could you go back to the state you were before you actually had that treatment? Could you go back to that personality before your treatment days? Because that's with a lot of other modalities. You can get a massage, you can get these things, you can touch the surface level, but you're still the same person, you're still the same experience.
Yeah.
When you go through these treatments, you're consciously interacting with your subconscious mind, with the fascia, and you overlay that experience every time, which expands your understanding and perception of your world and interaction with the world. It doesn't need to be a thought. It doesn't need to be conceptualized or journal. You open yourself up a little bit every time.
So we did just have a question from Josh. He's asked if you're closing in a few months.
Yep. Yeah, they're shutting us down. The system's shutting us down, but we're still here. We're still going to be around. That's why we saw everything that's happening. So we decided to spend the last 8 months developing this technology and able to serve this to people around the world and be able to implement these modalities and consciousness exercises, or whatever you want to call them, into the masses, so that we have a way of teaching them when we're not there. And all of this technology was based on all of our lives and all of our experiences in here, doing everything, how people learn and how to develop this. It's just the tip of what we're going to be doing, but things are changing. We all see that, so we decided to adapt and put this in there.
So just to clarify, your physical location is closing down. You're migrating over to primarily an online format. Will you guys still be offering any type of hands-on treatment after 2 months?
That will be available. It'll just look a little bit different. It won't be in the center, and it might not be the way it's been delivered. But, the elements will stay alive. The principles will stay alive. This is very important work. We recognize that, and we want to continue to offer it just in a different way.
The guys that can do this, like Stefan, and there's a handful of people that have learned this, will be sought out around the world. It is a very special technique and almost like a ninja master martial art. And with the world changing, these guys will be sought out. And I know where Steph lives.
First dibs.
Yeah. So if you guys are listening, if you've got pain, especially if you have pain in the body, just go see these guys before the new year. Book yourself in. It's like life transformational.
Yeah, you won't regret it. And go into it intentionally with the mindset that you actually are going into a full comprehensive transformation process, because that's really what you're doing.
And then maybe microdose. We were microdosing to help restructuring.
Yeah, the mycelium works the mycelium is very, very similar to fascia, how it works. It's a communication network. And if you look at if you take ginseng for energy and you take vitamin C, there's certain things you can microdose for the communication aspect to increase the communication with that.
It's a good point there. If you have the opportunity, watch the movie that was done, Fantastic Fungi, and you'll start to realize that there's actually a tremendous amount of parallels between mycelium and fascia in terms of communication and also structure and support. It's staggering, really.
Yeah, I love that. So as we close out, is there any final thoughts that you guys wanted to share with anyone who's watching this video?
Well, one thing that is really important for me for people to remember is that just like a brand new guitar out of the box that you've just got, and you look at it and you go to play it right away and it doesn't sound quite right, what does it need? It just needs to be tuned, right? So just think of yourselves as that, because I've come across a few people along the way that feel that they're broken or somehow they're missing something or they're not enough, that kind of stuff. And I just want to give you that reassurance that you are already whole and complete. You just might need a little bit of tuning. Nothing's missing.
Yeah, it's not your fault, but it is your mission and accountability to see what's going on and not just let it happen for you and step into that unknown and have courage. So anyone watching this, anyone part of Aga and Deus's group, I want to say thank you guys for resonating to a higher consciousness, a higher truth, especially during these times. Thank you for having the courage to go into it and go into the unknown and listen to this. And whatever you guys don't understand and whatever you guys, whatever resonates with you, keep it, throw everything else out. Just allow it to happen natural. So thank you guys.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for making the time to chat with us. We're big fans of what you guys are doing and looking forward to bringing you guys out here to Vancouver when the stars align.
All right.
Looking forward to it. See you guys.
Wow.
All right.